Welcome to this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through the industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Thomas Daley, board certified family law expert, tech innovation pioneer. He leverages his unique expertise in technology and the law to redefine the legal landscape, harnessing the power of artificial intelligence to help attorneys deliver better service at lower costs, and is also a frequent speaker on the topic to national organizations. Welcome to the show, Tom.
Thank you very much. And it's 2:30 a.m. here. I don't know whether I'm supposed to be saying good evening or good morning to you.
We can talk. Whatever the time is, we are both on the same page right now, Tom. And right now we are in that. You are the master here, and we are the learners here. We'll learn about a lot of things that you are an expert on. We'll be talking about AI. We'll talk about tech. We'll talk about justice wherever we are. There is a lot to learn from. And so before we come to this, let's learn a bit more about you, about your background, your journey, so that the listeners know a bit more about who they are listening to.
Sure. So I started in the tech world, primarily working in the financial sector. Back in 1987, I started developing stock trading systems for brokerage firms. Then I went to work at one of the stock exchanges in Chicago, or the only stock exchange in Chicago, I should say. And there I developed stock trading systems that we sold around the world to what we then called, not too politely, developing economies. And so, it'd be basically we'd be targeting countries who had fair and open stock markets, but they just didn't have the automation to handle the volume that their newly growing economies could handle. So, did that for a lot of years. Then I ran a consulting practice that spanned the United States through Y2K, and then decided to start my own software company. And what we did there was developed models for high frequency trading. I've got 20 or 30 patents around the world in that, which sounds impressive, except the way patents work is you put out your brilliant idea, and then people who are even smarter than you, and there's a lot of them out there, see that idea and say, you know what, if I made this change, it'd be even better. And then your patent you were so proud of 30 minutes ago is now just part of the stepping stone for the next innovator out there. So I sold that software company to a broker-dealer or a large bank in 2002, and decided, well, what should I do next in my life? And so a long time ago, I wanted to be a lawyer. But I, like a lot of people who want to do things like that, be a doctor or a lawyer, I didn't have the money to go to law school. So then I had the money to go to law school. So I went to law school. I like people. So I decided, well, if you like people, the two areas of law to practice are criminal defense or family law. Well, I figured if I did criminal defense, too many people would go to jail. I wouldn't be able to pay attention to the details. So I'm doing family law now. So now that's really what drives me is the practice of law has not evolved a lot since the Norman Conquest in 1060 or what have you in England. And so we still have a practice where using a sans serif font is considered innovative, and maybe you're not such a good lawyer. So coming from a background where technology was the way you made money, to an area where people would happily still use quills and parchment if they could get away with it, shows a lot of opportunities, presents a lot of opportunities for improvement.
Right. So how have been your experience with the law, being expertise in family law and looking at things, because if you look at the criminal justice system, there are also a lot of people there, even families. I don't know whether there are more number of criminals or people caught up in the criminal justice system, or more number of people caught up in bad sort of family laws, or unhappy family system, and wanting to take a break, but are not able to. I don't know what it is like in your part of the world, but everywhere people seems to be struggling with one thing or the other. They want to go to the court, but they do not want to go to the court because a lot of people are seeking justice. I don't know whether that is possible in every system and how much that is possible. So help us understand your understanding of your experience with the court of law.
Well, you make a really good point there. We say the criminal defense attorneys have bad people on their best behavior, and the family law attorneys have good people on their worst behavior. They have just accumulated and accreted so much hurt and resentment over time that they just can't take anymore. There are some really sad, terrible situations out there, and you bump into those once or twice a year. But generally, what's going on in the family law world is what was a very highly overlapping Venn diagram, if you will, of compatibilities and interests and values. Just over time has stretched out, so the overlap of that Venn diagram it becomes almost non-existent. And when the overlap of the interest values and that sort of thing disappears, you end up in a divorce situation. So, what is justice? So the aim of the court system really isn't justice. The aim of the court system is law, because what's one person's justice is another person's injustice. Sometimes it's black and white. You find a person who's done terrible things to children, and I think that we can all pretty much unanimously agree on what justice would look like in that situation. But again, that's not the bulk of the cases. The bulk of the cases are, a guy dives into his career, pulls away from the family. A mom pulls into the kids and pulls away from the husband, and they just don't have that much in common anymore. And, so what really is justice in that situation? So all we really do in the court system is apply law. And that can seem cold, which is why what you were saying earlier about people saying, well, I want to go to court. Well, I don't want to go to court. When you go to court, you've got a person who is going to handle, where I live in northern Texas, the judges are going to handle 2,000 or 3,000 cases a year, whereas I might handle 30 or 40 cases a year. So, the attorneys are going to dive into the case and know and care and that sort of thing. The judge doesn't get to do that. The judge is a fry cook. So they're just trying to process cases out there just as quickly as they can. So if you want a solution that is custom built for your children, if children are involved, or that is respectful of preserving your wealth or your income or your reputation, then you need to get it figured out outside of court. And that's really what my practice, that's what we try to do, is get people to resolve their case outside of court. Where AI helps us is that you can't negotiate a settlement if you're not prepared to go to trial. It's kind of what the Army, the military generals will tell you. The diplomats can't negotiate with any strength if the Army's not ready to rumble. We don't want the Army to rumble, but if they're not ready, the diplomats have no strength. So in preparing for trial, there's two areas that just really drive up the cost of litigation. And one of them has to do with document processing. And that's where I found the greatest leverage for AI. And when we say AI, I think we all know, but just to be clear, we're talking about the large language models that are being put out by, Anthropic or Google or OpenAI, those kinds of companies. So that's what we mean by AI, even though there's been, AI has been around for probably 100 years in various forms. So we're talking about LLMs, if you will, ChatGPT, Claude, that sort of thing. They're very text-based. Documents are text-based. So it's a very good marriage. It's not an easy marriage, though. So what I've been working on, and I only use it in my own cases, I haven't distributed it out to the firm yet, and certainly haven't distributed it outside of the firm, is we might get 1,000 documents in at the beginning of the case, looking at bank statements, brokerage statements, retirement statements, medical records, tax returns, you name it. And the normal workflow would be to have a client upload a whole bunch of mostly PDFs. It can be multimodal. We can get images and videos and that sort of thing, but text PDF is the bulk of it. Might upload thousands of documents. Then we'd have a clerk who we don't bill at a very high rate, but nonetheless, they're probably being billed at, $175 an hour. So, conversationally, I just always think of it as $200 an hour because it's easier to do the math in your head. And they might spend 15, 20, 25 hours going through that 1,000 documents or 2,000 documents, classifying them and organizing them. Whereas if we can coax the AI into doing it for us, it can organize, identify the documents, classify them, very classic classification problems. And then after they're classified, ask some sub questions about them. And, does it do it quickly? Not real quickly, but it might go through 1,000 documents in an hour. So, we kind of get used to double clicking on our mouse and having an instant response. But if you think you might have a clerk working 15 to 25 hours on a project, instead you turn it over to, Claude or ChatGPT, at the API level, and they get it done in 1 hour for maybe $50 of hard cost. I mean, that's a tremendous savings. So we can move faster, which means we can put more pressure on the opposing party. We can work less expensively, which means we put less pressure on our own client. And we can also, share that cost savings down to them. It's costing us. We don't have to hire as many people to do the work, and we don't have to bill the client as much to pay those people. So it really does work out quite well.
Right, right. So, Tom, let me understand it this way. So, you mean, does artificial intelligence understand families better, family system better, and family law better than human beings? What about the spirit of the law? Tell us, where does AI help? Who does AI help? Is it like that the medical system where it's become more on test reports and all those things rather than the patient being understood better by the physician? Is legal system going that way? Help us understand and tell us it is different than that.
Well, I think that's a good parallel that you draw, because where we see AI helping in the medical profession, the most salient example I see, and of course I'm not a doctor, so I just see it from the outside, is in radiology. When people get examinations, everybody knows, at least in the United States, it's going to be a computer that looks at the image first, and then it draws little circles and hands it off to a human to look at, and that's where the errors start to creep in, is when the human comes to look at it. But you're right that the AI doesn't ask about, if it's a mammogram, for example, the AI is not asking itself what's going on in this woman's life. What's her financial condition, and even things like what's her past history, medical history, and metabolic rate that might influence the development of a cancerous risk. So it does not take any of that into consideration. It's just a really fast, accurate way to say, hey, look here. The AI is doing the same sort of thing in the family law world. It doesn't, we all know it doesn't have feelings. The problem with it is it feels like it has feelings. So one time, I had a case where the dad, I represent the mom, the dad was sending the mom the most unbelievably horrible text messages, long text messages, using language. And I have to admit, my use of language isn't always, straight out of the church group, but this is language I wouldn't use on any human being in the world, certainly not in that volume anyway. And we wanted to go to a hearing. Well, this gal doesn't have a whole lot of money. So I thought, you know what I'll do? I'll have one of the clerks upload those text messages, because she sent us screenshots, upload those images to one of the LLMs and have it translated. When I did that, the LLM came back and said, it translated the first page, then it said, you know what? I don't want to be a part of using this kind of language. I'm like, you don't want? What does the word want mean in your world? So I said, well, no, I'm trying to help the person this language being used against. And so I had this argument with it. And finally, I will admit, I got mad. I got mad at a computer algorithm. That's probably a mental health symptom I shouldn't talk about on a global podcast, but nonetheless, I said, you are helping perpetuate this sort of verbal violence by your standing on this fake little throne that some programmer put you on. And you know what it said? It said, you're right. I was a little too entrenched in my own notions of what I should and shouldn't do in terms of this. And then it went ahead and translated it. It felt like I had a discussion, but really all I did was program the model, but instead of using a formal programming language like Python or C# or Rust or something like that, I programmed it in English. Someone was doing a statistical processing to figure out what word came next, just by me having a temper tantrum, not really having any design there. I set up the sequence of words to flip it out of its safety bucket. It feels like it has feelings, but it really doesn't. And you can see that sometimes when you ask it. You say something like, you have a premarital agreement, okay, or prenuptial agreement, and they're dense. Those things they were written 100 years ago, and we really haven't changed too much since then. And so they're dense, florid language, not easy for attorneys to understand, absolute impossibility for clients to understand. So you send it to the LLM and you say, draft an outline of this and outline each section, pointing out the most important things. Okay. So now, if I told you that we represent this gal who doesn't have a lot of money and she's going to marry this rich guy, and I said, hey, you point out the things in this agreement that you think are most important to her, even as a non-lawyer, you would look through it and you would think, okay, what does a person who's coming from a different economic background, what would be her interest in this thing? And you would highlight some things because you'd have some kind of empathy. So, even if you didn't have a background of modest financial background, you would know people who did. So just some sort of human empathy. The LLM might skip over some things, like the fact that, a common thing that it never picks out, the boilerplate that we have for prenups or for prenuptial agreements says that upon the death of the moneyed spouse, the other spouse is homeless. Think about that.
Right.
The marriage could have worked. You got married and lived happily together for 65 years. Then the moneyed spouse dies and the other spouse is homeless. That can't be the right outcome. The language models never pick that up as a deficiency. I think you would pick that up in a heartbeat. You'd be looking at it saying, I can't be reading this right. I can't be reading this right that a successful marriage ends in the homelessness of one of the spouses. But the LLM has no feelings like that. So we still need compassionate human beings. Where I think it can help probably the most, besides just the efficiencies that I was talking about and just the mechanics of handling discovery documents. I think one of the guys, I forget which company he worked for last week, was talking about, I think it was somebody from OpenAI was saying that he was saying we already have artificial general intelligence, which is always a funky concept to me because we can't agree on a definition of intelligence, but we seem to have an agreement on a definition of artificial intelligence, which I don't understand how one can be done without the other, but let's go with that. He says we have artificial general intelligence where the standard, of course, is human level reasoning, as if that's the apex of all possible reasoning models, but it's certainly the apex of what we can conceive. And he said, I don't mean that the AI can do better than all humans at every task, but it can do better than most humans at most tasks. And when I see simple drafting tasks being handed off to one of the AI models, they do draft, maybe not great, but they draft better than a person who can't afford an attorney does. And an example I saw of that, I was representing a mom, and dad has some pretty serious mental health issues, and he no longer had an attorney because he decided all the attorneys were in cahoots against him. And we filed a motion for the judge to interview the child to see what the child's preferences were for where she should live. And that's a kind of a unique thing we can do in Texas. I'm not sure it's a great thing to do, but it's a thing that we can do. And he didn't want that to happen. So he typed up an incoherent and crazy ramble to the judge to oppose it. And I kind of felt sorry for him. I knew we were going to win, but I thought, let's have a little bit of a fight here. So I went to the LLM and I said, what if I didn't know anything? What if I said these 3 sentences? You are a Texas litigation attorney. You represent a dad who opposes a child talking to the judge. Here's the statute. Please write me a motion opposing that interview. And it did a dang good job. It was the best, and it was the best reasoned opposition I've seen from any attorney. It did a really good job there. So again, was it going to do anything about the feelings of this father with respect to his child? No, it wasn't going to do anything about that. But what it would have done is it would have put him in the game. If somebody who's trained in the law and had a lot of experience and is very good at performing at this level, and somebody with no experience in performing at this level, you're not even in the game. You can't win. But if the LLM can pull your performance up to here, maybe you're not up here with the best trained attorneys, but you're pretty high up. The judge, who is still the embodiment of the human value system in the court system, can bridge that gap in their role as a purveyor of equity, if you will. So no, it's not going to have feelings. It's not going to care about people. But if it can get you in the game, it can get you into a zone where somebody who does care about people can help you out.
Right. So it can bridge the gap between not so very successful lawyers, so-called, and the successful ones, in the sense that AI will give you, it will fill those knowledge gaps in terms of that. But how do you utilize your own mind into it? Because as an individual, as you said that, that you get 40, 50 cases in a year, you still have that understanding of things. How about a system where you said a judge may have 200 to 3,000 cases, and if they have so many and they start using AI even in terms of delivering judgments, understanding that I am a human. At the end of the day, I will start looking at those whatever the AI has written. But technically, once you see something written, it is almost like you start following those cues and make up your mind as to what has been written rather than applying your own mind you would have done if you were doing it independent of everything else. How do you see this part happening? Some may say, some may not say, but anybody is free to, just look into AI and see what it will deliver in terms of that particular case, especially where emotions are involved, where there are much more, things beyond money.
Well, that is a critical point. So what is the role of the judge? There's a guy, and I can't tell you his name right now. But he wrote the book, I think, Getting to Yes, and he had a TED talk he put on many years ago. And I don't remember a thing about his TED talk except for a story he told about a woman and how she solved a community problem. And I kind of stole his story, and I use it to describe judges in this manner. In every, and I focus on family law disputes. In every family law disputes, we have at least three sides. Three sides. We've got a husband side, we have a wife's side, but we also have the surrounding community's interest in a just and predictable outcome. And the role of the judge is to be the community's representative in delivering that predictable and just outcome. So where the AI can help the attorneys out with some of the mechanics of getting things ready for the judge's job is still deeply human. And we've run that experiment in the United States in some jurisdictions in the criminal world. And this is where we find bias to be a huge problem. And when we say bias, of course, we mean data bias, but data bias also creates human bias. And what I mean by that is this: some of the jurisdictions who are having to process thousands of criminal cases, in a week in some very large cities, who are making bail determinations. Should this guy get bail and get to go home, or should he be remanded into custody until it's time to try his case? How much of a danger is he to society if he's allowed to go home? And what they found was it was routinely denying bail to black defendants and routinely granting bail to white defendants. Well, why was that? Because they had accumulated all this data showing that if you're going to have a recidivist, it's most likely to be a black person. And the reason for that is we shove more of those people through our justice system. So if we send 90% of the people through the justice system are left-handed, then guess what? It's going to look like left-handed people are a danger to society. And so by having on the form, what is your ethnicity? The AI, and this wasn't an LLM, this is before LLMs, but the AI, the formulas were saying, oh, if you're poor, if you're black, if you're uneducated, you're a danger to society and you shouldn't get bail. Well, that was a gruesome outcome. And the jurisdictions that adopted those systems were humiliated, paid millions of dollars for them, and had to uninstall them. We see the same sort of bias in LLMs. And you might once in a while see news stories about that. I think there was a story not that long ago about one of the image generators. No matter what you would tell it to generate, it would generate white people, no matter what the social context or historical context was. Well, the programmers go, well, I can't possibly be right. And so they start trying to adjust those biases, those trillion parameters that those models follow, and people are back there turning those little switches, and all of a sudden then it's kind of like the show Hamilton. Now it was generating only dark complected people for everything. So bias is a huge problem in the underlying data. There's a joke that says that if AI were to tell you what weapon systems to use in a war, they would tell you to get stone, axes, and spears, because most wars in all the duration of human history have been fought with stone, axes, and spears. That's obviously the wrong answer, but it is data-based. And so, yeah, I think that we've got to be careful in getting that one representative of the surrounding community to be over-reliant on something that is outside of their judgment. Also in Texas, where I live and where I practice, we elect our judges. What does that mean? Well, what that means is truly this surrounding community picks people. I want AJ to sit in judgment. And when people in the community have a dispute that they can't resolve, I want him to decide. Why? I don't know why. Maybe I think he's got a good value system. Maybe he just votes the way I do in presidential elections. Whatever, I decided I want this guy to decide our disputes. And then when we get Judge AJ up there, he says, yeah, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to rely on a computer model to tell me what to do. Well, you completely thwarted the process, the democratic process there. So I think we have to be very careful as we move AI up the food chain. You notice that what I didn't talk about was using AI to tell the attorneys what decisions to make. I think a good use of it right now is just the mechanical, routine stuff, the robotic, categorizing documents, identifying documents that are missing or incomplete. We still have a concept we call human in the loop. We make sure that a clerk or somebody checks everything. When I ask these LLMs now a question, and I'll say, in Texas, does the community estate stop developing when the judge says out of her mouth you're divorced, or when the final decree is written? Because those could be separate days. And I said, give me some citations of law and case law to support you. LLM confidently comes back and says, oh, this is absolutely the law, and here's 2 cases you should read. They're not even close. Most of the time, to this day, most of the time, those cases don't even exist. So we have to have a human in the loop when it's time to make these final and most important decisions that affect people's lives, sometimes forever.
Absolutely. Intelligent human in the loop and not just artificial intelligence.
That's right. I agree with that.
Right. What about, the spirit of the law? How do there's this, in India, we use this called spirit of the law, if I understand correctly, even from here, this point of view. Law is not just about laws. It's, it's applicable in different situations. Like the same medicine can be used in different things, just like in medical science. How do you make sure that the spirit of the law is also followed? As they say, that justice should not just be seen, but it should also be seen to be done. Whose job will it be in the coming days to ensure that the spirit of law is taken care of, rather than just the law has been, the rule of the law has been taken care of?
Yeah, and I think that's probably the most important consideration. The people who are coming along, the 30-year-olds and the 40-year-olds. It's going to be our job, the 50 and 60-year-olds and the 65 and 70-year-olds. It's going to be our job to say, you're right that there are new technologies out there, and you are right to want to use those. And those things are going to allow you to deliver better services faster and less expensively. But your judgment, your moral judgment, and your capacity for compassion cannot be put in second place behind that. And there are, I think that one of the reasons attorneys have bad reputations is there are attorneys who don't exercise moral judgment. Just a simple and almost benign example. We're in the Christmas tree behind me. We're in a big holiday season here. And, in Texas, generally, if you've had a divorce, you've got kids, one parent is going to get the children from the time they get out of school until the 28th of December, and the other parent gets them for the rest of the break. So I had a gal call me a few years ago, and she said, hey, Dad works out of town, and he's supposed to pick up the kids on Friday, but he said his plane's going to be late. So he's not going to be able to make it on time. And he may not, he asked me, can he pick him up late or can he pick him up the next day? Can I prevent him from seeing the children all during Christmas? Well, there are plenty of attorneys who would take that case and say, hey, man, you missed your time, you missed your kids. But I told her, and I'm not the only one who would say this, I told her, even if that is the law, I'm not doing that. Why would we take these children? Forget him. I get it. You guys have some unresolved problems. You'll probably die with unresolved problems. I can't fix that. But your children still think he's their daddy, and they want to see him, and they've been excited about it. They've been talking for the last few weeks. I can't wait to see you at Christmas time. I bought you something that I found when I was on my travels, and the kids are all excited about it. Why would you take that away from them? And I think that we still have to have attorneys who are willing to say, I will not sign my name to that request. But then we also need judges who will say, well, even if I have 2 rotten attorneys who will sign their names, those rotten requests, I'm not going to grant it. Even if the letter of the law here was that you must pick up these kids by 6 p.m., I'm not going to deprive these children of time with their dad over a 2-hour delay.
Absolutely. In India, there's this term called, lawyers and everyone associated with the legal system as officers of the court. I don't know
Right.
if it's the same thing. Yeah.
Exactly.
If they are officers of the court, do you think it's time to, in law schools and everywhere, this is the first thing that needs to be inculcated in everyone that, listen, you are first officers of the court and you got to make sure that we follow the spirit of the law and not just the letter of the law. And that will where the justice system will become better, and that with all artificial intelligence and whatever sort of intelligence comes in, they will help you rather than twist and make those unnecessary changes to what the things, and justice should be the one that will be focusing on, not just a few $100 here and there. What is your understanding?
Well, I agree with that. We also use the term officers of the court. So if we think of the courts, as I explained earlier, the court system as being the surrounding community's representative in seeing that predictable and just outcomes are delivered, then as officers of the court, then it's incumbent upon us to work in furtherance of that mission of community stability and peace. And I think that the thing, just talking to you makes me think about this distinction. I haven't thought about it before, but we talk about artificial intelligence. But what we don't talk about, and I hope we never talk about, except in the negative, is artificial judgment.
Right.
Even in the non-tech world, we think of intelligence agencies that work in governments, and they're feeding data up to a chief executive, a prime minister, or a president. We're still relying on this prime minister's judgment. He receives the intelligence, and hopefully he's an intelligent person, but we're relying upon his judgment to process that intelligence. So far, we haven't even ever heard, I've never even thought of the term artificial judgment before until I started talking to you, and I appreciate that. You give me a whole new thing to talk about when I talk to law students about the apt use of technology in their worlds. The artificial intelligence can be good. Artificial judgment, no such thing. We're still relying on yours.
Absolutely. A very recent case, if you see, I don't know if it's an ideal case, but in South Korea, the president suddenly decided to go for martial law. And it was almost implemented, and then it was revoked. Now the president, if I understand, that whole motion of impeachment has happened. But isn't it something? So any one individual, I can almost, all of a sudden I can lose my mind, maybe because I'm tired, maybe I have not eaten well, maybe whatever the case, and I can. So that is where you need good advisors around you. That
Right.
is where you said second pair of eyes. Even in journalism, in news agencies, we use this called, if you are writing some news flash, you've got those second pair of eyes, something. Even in all those typical cases also, even in nuclear weapons and all everywhere there is this second pair of eyes. We need to have that person, however high you are, but there is this second pair of eyes who is going to look at it and make sure that, okay, everything is being followed properly with mind, intellect, intelligence, as well as heart. That is where I guess it will all help. Otherwise, no one is perfect. We can just loop, we can have selective amnesia. We can become dormant for quite some time. Whatever it is, I don't know how to put it.
That's exactly right. Well, I tell clients all the time when they get a hateful email or text message from their spouse, their former spouse, they'll say, he said, I'm a no good, lousy overspender, and I need to respond to that. And I always tell them, here's the first thing. Was there a question? If there's not a question, you don't need to respond. If there is a question, you may still not need to respond, but you don't need to respond if there's not a question. I say that all the time to clients. Well, the other day I received an email, probably as you said, maybe I hadn't eaten, maybe I hadn't slept. My judgment wasn't where it should be. I got an email, and I don't work in a private office. I've taken over a conference room, and I have the staff working there with me. And so I was kind of narrating my day, and I'm saying, oh, well, I got this email, and I got my hands up, and I pounced on my keyboard, and I started saying out loud the email I was typing. And my head paralegal walked across the room, snapped my keyboard shut. She goes, was there a question in there? I'm like, no, there wasn't. And I was about to send an email that I couldn't unsend. So thank you for that. I needed that help in my own judgment at that time. The algorithm wasn't going to stop me. Microsoft Outlook was going to go like, yeah, done, sent. But I needed that another human out there who wanted to look after my practice and look after her ability to earn a living, to exercise that human judgment. Say, hey, I know you're the boss, but we're not doing that.
Absolutely. One last question I want to understand from our with respect to AI and judicial system is, men. Nowadays there are lots of places where men are questioning the existing laws, family laws. Even in India, there have been certain cases where a lot of people are wanting to have a relook at the way family laws have been designed. Somewhere along the line, some men or several men may have the feeling that, the laws are designed almost to destroy them. And I don't know whether it is right or wrong, but we can't stop someone to have that feeling, especially if they are fighting not only the case, but also they seem like fighting the system itself. How do you see AI will, do you think AI will create a level playing ground for such men?
I don't know how much help AI will offer there, because I'll tell you what I think they're fighting against. And I had this discussion not long ago with a gal who right now I think she's working on a Netflix documentary, and I think is entitled "How to Destroy a Man." I mean, what you just articulated is precisely the premise of her of the show she's working on. And I was telling her that it would seem odd to me that a system that was designed and implemented by men could be characterized as being targeted at men, because I know who's in our legislature in Texas. It's a bunch of divorced men. And so when we say those laws are designed to hurt men, I just don't really think that that's very credible. But I know where they're coming from. I know where the feeling is, because we have forever had this notion that that generally moms do the heavy lifting of the kid work. But my mom, she was a stay-at-home mom. She never worked a day. Never had a job other than taking care of us in a household, which wasn't nothing, but it wasn't the same as going to work every day, like my dad had. They had a very divided system of labor there. He went out, made money, came home, ate dinner, and kind of went to bed and did stuff on the weekends. My mom was the parent. If they had gotten divorced, which thankfully they didn't, and there had been a custody battle, if you ask a judge who was the primary caretaker of these children, it was the mom. The mom's going to win that custody battle. But because the way the economic system had been working for the last 5,000 years, my mom had no ability to go out and make money. She had 2 years of college, and she went to college in the early 1960s, and the degree that was available to her was home economics. So she didn't even get 2 years of engineering or accounting or something like that. She got 2 years of how to sew and mend and iron and cook. So she was clearly the primary caregiver, and she would have had primary custody of her children, but she wouldn't have been able to make much money. So she would have been receiving income from her children's father until the children grew up. And so from her perspective, and I think kind of from society's perspective, the children are with their primary caregiver, and the children need financial resources, and that's a just outcome. To my dad, it would have been, I never get to see my kids. And you act like me going to work every day, and my dad worked for the Department of Agriculture, and there were various and different presidential administrations, and sometimes he felt like he had a secure job, and other times he felt like he didn't have a secure job, and the anxiety that comes with that, he dealt with that every single day. And so his perspective would have probably been the same that a lot of men's is, what I did doesn't count. And it does. But when you're asking the question, who's the primary caregiver, it doesn't really count. Now, what we see is more and more women are in the workforce. My office is primarily female attorneys. We've got 4 men, and in just the Plano office that I'm in, and 7 women working in there, I think, as the attorneys. And those women work every single day. And they have to divide up those parenting responsibilities. I think they still probably do more than half, but instead of being like my mom and doing 90%, they're probably doing 55%. So now, if they are to get divorced, and we're trying to figure out what to do with the children, 45-55 split, that's a rounding error. That's 50-50. And so now we start to see a greater push, at least in Texas, for 50-50 custody of children. Spend half the time with mom, half the time with dad. And the moms now, a lot of them have more economic power, so they're able to make their own money. And so we see less pressure to do things like pay alimony, or what in Texas we call it post-divorce maintenance, because we have to call things by hard names. But anyway, you see less pressure. So, the dads are going to spend more time with their children than they would have 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. And they're going to be able to retain more of their income and wealth than they would have in that same time period. But law moves slow. I think it was Oliver Wendell Holmes, and I can't quote him. I'll mess it up. I try to, but he says the path of the law is not straight, but it's meandering. Or Martin Luther King said, the arc of justice is long, the arc of time or arc of history is long, but it bends toward justice. So things don't ever move at the rate and exactly the direction I think a lot of people would like for them to move in, but it does move, I think, in a direction of justice. It does, as the on ground reality changes, the way the legal system reflects that changes with it, just at a much different pace.
Right, right, Tom. So my last question here is: there with this saying, "Justice hurried is justice buried," because of its own reasons, and then justice delayed is justice denied. So if AI comes in, do you think both these factors will be taken care of? There will be no delay in justice, and there will be no hurried justice. It will move at simply a faster rate. How do
At
you
a
see
better
this?
pace. Yeah, I think so. Again, the adoption of technology is really slow. So we're not going to see huge leaps tonight. But how these technology innovations go. They get adopted like this, and all of a sudden everybody's doing it. 10 years ago, there was no electronic filing of legal documents. When we wanted to file a document, we even went up to the courthouse and handed it over to them, and they stamped it and gave it back to us. And the idea that we would do everything electronically, I don't know. I don't think anybody would have said that was a reality. And now, 10 years later, we're not allowed to go to the courthouse with a paper document. We must do it electronically. So it was adopted like this, and then hockey sticks up. And I think you'll see the same thing with the AI. We've got to make it so that it's safe. Right now when I'm using it, I've got my paralegals are trained to look for problems and to insert their own judgment. But we've got to make it so that the implementation and the use of the AI is such that when less committed, less highly trained people use it, you don't get really bad outcomes really fast. If you want to make a bunch of mistakes quickly, let a computer go at it. So, we got to get it so that it's mature enough so that a less careful operator doesn't do a lot of damage really quickly. But yeah, we can start just doing the mechanical work, doing it faster, and doing it more accurately. I think that I'm seeing that I'm able to put a little more pressure on opposing counsel to keep things moving along. They dump 2,000 documents on us, think, oh, thank goodness, he's going to leave us alone for the next week or two. Nope, I'll be right back at you tomorrow morning, man. We're going to keep this thing moving. But there's also, there's the AI is where I work with the law. But as you keep pointing out, there's still a very human side to this. We've got a brand new judge in one of the counties next to me, and she's doing something that I think is genius, and I hope she doesn't lose her energy. And what she's doing is this. Every Wednesday morning at 8:30 a.m., she has what I call a cattle call. And that means if lawyers, not going to take parties, but if lawyers are having a problem they just can't figure out, show up at 8:30 in the morning and she'll solve it for you. So you go up there and say, hey, judge, he wants to use so-and-so as a child counselor. My client wants to use a different person as a child counselor. We need to have a decision on this. What are you going to do? And she'll probably say, well, I'm not going to use either one of those. I'm going to use a third one that I pick myself. But the point is that if an attorney tries to throw up a roadblock by being disagreeable, she's like, no, come in here Wednesday and I'll solve it. And that's moving cases along better in her court. Now she's brand new, but I just absolutely adore having a case in her court because I know that if somebody throws up a roadblock, tries to throw up a procedural roadblock, longest it's going to last a week, and I'm going to get it fixed. So yeah, the AI is going to help us at the lawyer level with the mechanics, but we still need, there's still procedural improvements we can make that don't require any sort of technology. They just require a commitment to justice and a proper, as you point out, a proper pace. We don't want to go too fast. We don't want to go too slow.
Absolutely. There is much to learn and understand about all these things from you, Tom. And I'm sure a lot of people would like to connect with you, learn more from you, be your client if the need be. What's the best way for them to connect with you?
So the best way to connect is one of the links I think that we have is goes to my bio page at our law firm's website, which has all my contact information. And so there's phone numbers, there's ways to get a hold of email. So that's the best way to get a hold of me. If it's if you're in the unfortunate position of needing a family law attorney, that is the number one way to get a hold of me. There's also a link. I think I gave you another link for a website probably called marriagedocs.store, and that's more personal, bloggy, that kind of stuff. And people who are just interested in the technology or just the evolution of how we're going to care for each other in the context of a legal system with emerging technology will find ways to contact me there as well.
Wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
It was a privilege. Thank you very much.